You are listening to The Lunchbox on UNISA Radio. The African voice, it's all about you.
It is exactly 2:15. A very good afternoon and warm welcome to the Lunchbox Live at UNISA Radio, the African voice, and it's all about you. My name is Tonsoro Kgaugelo and I'm with you till the hour 4. And today we're having a very, very jam-packed show. So, brace yourself because the only time you're going to hear music is when I'm trying to breathe, okay? So do connect with us on Twitter, it's at UNISA Radio. On Facebook, it's UNISA Radio. Joining me in studio, I've mentioned this, I think it was last week, Wednesday, and due to unforeseen circumstances, I didn't deliver to my promise. But I managed to secure our author once again this week. So we are joined in studio by the author of Ecosystem. You know, when I heard this title, I was touched, I was like, "Ish, this is a note that's gonna touch my nerves now," because now, you're touching about human condition, and this is something that people just overlook, and especially as younger people whom we feel like it's a norm, it's part of life, nothing should change, nothing should go up or down around it. So this is a book, it's one of his books, but this gentleman joining me in studio has not just woken up today, he was born and then he's an author. He comes from a very, very, very vast background where he's been in corporate and, he has served and contributed fairly in corporate till he took a different route and thus becoming an author, being a self-published author, and he published Ecosystem in September 2018, and now his recent book, now wait for it, now you need to be attentive for how I'm going to say this. His recent book is On Your S. Did you know the S? What comes after it is an H. IT. Yes. So now, once you put it together and you figure it out, I'm just being radio friendly here, so you will get it right there. So, but normally, how I would say it with my friends, we're like, "Oh shucks," so we know what we're talking about. so in my friend's language, so it means own your shucks. So he deliberately chose this title because it had to. Anything less seemed to be okay. I think I've went off the border now. No, you know what? I think this is the moment where I'll just hold myself, arrest myself, and welcome Mr. Ishmael. Zaid Ishmael.
Zaid Ismail, yes.
Ismail. Oh, okay. So we said Ishmael. So it's Ismail.
Yes.
Ismail. Is there the one that says Ishmael where perhaps there's an H between?
That's the Hebrew version, yes.
And yours is?
Arabic.
Amazing. So does that make you an Arabian?
No. It's an Arabic name, but I'm Muslim, and that's why I've adopted that name, or that surname, at least for myself.
Okay, for yourself, all right. Amazing. So you are an independent author, and you have, as I've mentioned in my introduction, a vast background of being in corporate. This transition, why?
Wow. As many times as I get asked that question, I come up with a different answer. I think there's no single answer to it, but I've always had a passion for the human condition, understanding it, unpacking it. And from my side, I got to a point in corporate where I believed that as a human being, there wasn't much growth left for me there. I had done my duty in the trenches. I had worked through the different ranks, spent time in public and private sector as well, local and overseas. And in all of that, the one thing that always seemed to come to the fore for me was why people behave the way that they do in different power structures.
Yes.
And if you think about it, everything we do in life is always within the context of us participating in some or other power structure. Be it in the family unit, be it in the community, as a global citizen, or even in the workplace.
Yes.
And for me, the consistent trends that I've noted between those different scenarios, those different settings, is what always fueled my curiosity. And eventually last year, March, I think it was, I decided that corporate was no longer doing it for me. And I walked into my boss's office, had a very interesting discussion.
Oh, no.
And we parted ways amicably.
Wow.
And that's when I took the dive. Because I had been
Yeah.
sitting on the first book for probably about 5 years. It was a rough draft that I had touched on, reworded, rewrote, started from scratch. And eventually I thought, I need to do this. So
Yeah.
I took the plunge, left corporate, started working from home, and within about 4 months or so, I had my first book ready to publish.
Amazing. Now, looking at what you have said, and I can automatically see that there is a pattern that you have when you're writing. It must be something that is real, that is something that you have observed as a spectator or you have experienced. I could be wrong, but that's just my take from what you've said. And now I want you to go into depth as to what is your writing pattern. Well, because now as an author, of course, it might differ per author. But many authors, there's this personal experience that said, no, you are moving out of here, you're going to do this, and you're going to put it in paper.
Spot on. I am very much inclined towards writing about things the way I practically experience it, but there's one very critical difference, I think. And that is that I didn't want to use the platform of writing or publishing a book to talk about my story, because everyone's got a story, and that's not undermining it. It's just the reality is that we all have our struggles, we all have our triumphs, and we all believe that there's something to be learned from it, and there is. But at some point, we need to consider that there's a larger narrative that needs to get out there beyond our personal experience. So for me, writing has always demanded two things from me. The one is, I always wanted it to be conversational because I want to be talking to the person that's reading. I don't want to be talking down at them. It's not me that knows everything, that wants to tell you how you should live your life, because that's not what I'm about. And the second thing is that it must be accessible. So when I say accessible, I mean both from a language use perspective, as well as it must be relatable. People must be able to connect with what I'm talking about. It must be something that they must experience as a truth that they can either question critically, but they can at least connect with the value of what it is that I'm offering. And for me, that's what always inspires my thought processes and my patterns of writing, is to make sure that I get that message across. Because for me, it's more about getting the message across rather than showing what a good wordsmith I am. So that's always been at the core of it. And in a way, that's actually what inspired the second book, the one that we discussed today, the Own It book.
The Own It book.
Because if you don't own it, it will own you, right? And that's what life is about, right? If you don't take hold of your life, someone else is going to take hold of it for you, and you're not going to realize this. So this book is not about telling you how you must fix your life. Because everyone has a story about how to fix your life.
Everyone literally has a story, and it's just disturbing. It's like, okay, so did you get it right? And now what I want to understand is, I know now people have heard us in the beginning saying that you've done a IT and you were an IT specialist, and both your titles, the Own It and as well as the Ecosystem, these are titles where you would find from someone who has studied psychology, someone who is a therapist, clinical therapist, and they had to really sit down and go through some meditations in life. What made you special to have these words? Who did you speak to? Us Africans, we were just going to say, I know, what, me being black, I spoke to Gogo down there, and then I had a ritual. So who was it? Was it Ela? Who was it?
So that's a very good question, because I have some very interesting and very contentious discussions, sometimes debates with people that I align towards mainstream psychology or the mainstream therapy approach and counseling. And the reason for that is because I'm not one to shy away from hard-hitting truths. I don't want to facilitate a discussion so that someone else gets to a realization at some point in time about what they think might be the right answer. Because there's too much of that. There's too much vagueness and nuance in everything that we always talk about and discuss about the human condition. I also don't like things like mantras, standing in front of the mirror and telling yourself something. And I'll tell you just now why I don't like that. Please remind me to touch on that.
All right.
And for me, the practical reality is this. If the mainstream approach to, and I'll call it the human condition, is correct or effective, we wouldn't see a spiraling of mental health issues.
Yes.
And we know how bad mental health issues are. We know that it's almost endemic now, because there's not a single family that is unaffected by it. And in many ways, if we have to follow the strict guidelines, we'll probably find that every single one of us in some way or another will be defined as having a mental disorder of sorts. And that's a fundamental difference from my side. I disagree with that approach strongly. And the reason for that is because if it was the truth, we'd be able to connect to it without having to go through an academic to understand it.
Yeah.
Because the human condition is something we all experience. We all live it. So there has to be something a lot more simple, a lot more grounded in reality that we should be able to connect with, that goes beyond just theories of why people behave the way they do. Because the why is different for every single one of us.
Yes.
So the one thing you'll see I don't ever do is tell someone that for this situation you must do this. Because the moment I'm telling you what you need to do in a situation, I'm asking you to do something that worked for someone else whose reality is different to yours. And that I avoid. But I don't stop at that point, because then I'd be just like what I just criticized about facilitating a discussion to no end. Right?
Yes.
So what I rather focus on is self-awareness, is understanding why you do what you do. Because once you understand why you do it, you can then make a conscious decision about, is this what I want to be doing? And then you can decide, okay, I either want to be doing this, or if I don't want to be doing it, I either accept it because I'm not willing to change it, or I'm going to change it and I'm going to accept the consequences of the decision to change it. So my book is very much focused on self-awareness.
Yes.
And mindfulness, but mindfulness in a very different context, because everyone talks about mindfulness these days, right? And worse than that, a lot of people confuse mindfulness and meditation. They think that if you meditate, you'll become more mindful.
Yes. And I feel guilty for not meditating, because everyone around me meditates.
And it's patently not true, because mindfulness, just by practical example, the moment I have to think about being mindful, it means I'm focused on the mindfulness rather than what I'm actually dealing with.
Yes.
Right? And that's the kind of practical reality I'm saying we need to understand. Because mindfulness is about being present. And that's what everyone says. So that sounds like the easy part. What they don't talk about is that if you're not aware of your emotional bias or disposition when you get into that moment, you'll be present, but with your own bias that you don't realize exists. So for this reason, in the book, I talk about two states of mindfulness. There's emotional mindfulness and situational mindfulness. So the emotional mindfulness makes you aware of why you feel the way you do, why you're inclined to anger or irritation or frustration or elation, or whatever it is.
Yes.
That's the emotional mindfulness, understanding the why of your emotional makeup. And then the situational mindfulness, that becomes a lot easier then, because now, if you're no longer contending with all these subconscious emotions and currents that drive your behavior without you understanding why, you're now able to focus more on what you're doing.
All right. Let's hold that note as I allow my news team to come in. When we come back, I want to understand how, because there's this word that keeps running in our campuses. Find yourself. So I want to understand, because now the book Own It, Own Yours, it's almost touching on that subject.
Yes.
Like, hey, go find it. So we want to know
Absolutely.
how to find it. 32 minutes past the hour 2, and we're still speaking to Mr. Zaid about his book, and the book is Own It. So, Mr. Zaid, Own Yours, as I've mentioned shortly before, my news team had to share whatever they prepared for us for the day. the word find yourself.
Yes,
Does your book cater for that word?
absolutely. Far too often, you see, it's exactly those kinds of terms that misdirect us. It almost distracts us,
Yes.
right? Because it says find yourself, which implies that you've lost yourself somewhere. Not within, but somewhere,
Somewhere.
right? So it almost leads you to believe that you need to go out somewhere and find yourself.
Yes.
Now, just because you go into a different experience or into a different setting, which allows you to get away from the distractions of your current setting, it might make it easier for you to reconnect with who you are. But that assumes that you are aware of what questions to ask yourself, what to probe about yourself. Because this is a very sensitive subject, because it touches so close to what people have accepted as being a definition of their truth. So I've had people that come to me and say that I am love, and everything I do and everything I say emanates from a position of love. And there may be some truth in that, and your truth might be different to my truth.
Yes.
But does that allow you to connect with who you are when you're faced with a really difficult situation? Or when something cuts really close to the bone and it flusters you in a way that brings out the anger in you, or brings out the frustration, or brings out the insecurity in you. So when someone says go find yourself, or you need to find yourself, it's not about finding yourself, it's about connecting with what you want to make a difference in. And everyone wants to make a difference in something different. You can't find your purpose in someone else's purpose.
Yes.
You can align with it, but your value that you want to contribute will always be unique.
However, when someone tells another person to go find themselves, I think it's very tricky, because how do you know if I haven't?
Yes.
It brings that question, what are you seeing that makes you think that I'm not the authentic me?
Exactly. And authenticity is an amazing thing.
Yeah, because as I'm hearing you mentioning it, as when you're saying that it means I've lost myself somewhere else and just not within. And even if it was within, how did this person suddenly decide? So it comes back to what you've said earlier on, when people, or maybe a specific profession somewhere, treat you or diagnose you with a specific theory that has worked for someone, that's not you. And in life, I think it's true when they say there's a yin and a yang. It's true when they say there's an up and a down and the left and the right. Because then maybe someone, indeed, they are just angry, and that's the self that they are,
Yes.
which won't make sense why we're not all happy people. But maybe that's who they are. I've met someone, and I remember on Sunday I was telling people that person once said he is a dog. And everything he does, it's literally what, when we think of dogs, they would do. And they wanted to say, no, he's been hurt, he's going through a lot of things and everything. And I'm saying, but if there's black and white being the colors, and there is dark and light and the sun and the moon, maybe he might just be right. That's who he is. Who said he needs to find the other? So it's very tricky to tell that kind of a person,
Yes.
because that person, going back to what we discussed, mental illness, that person might just lose themselves entirely.
Yes.
They might never even come back, and it was better to have had accepted them as a dog. And then they would maybe graduate and be something else, maybe maybe a fox.
It touches on a very important point, because, and this is something that there's many different definitions for it out there, especially in the academic space. I'm assuming you'll probably have a different definition as well. But when we talk about truths versus facts, we talk about what you just mentioned now, that example of a man who thinks he's a dog. His truth is what he perceives to be true. That's his truth, right? We can observe him and say, but we know you're not a dog. We can see you're not a dog. You don't have the shape or the form or the characteristics of a dog. So we know you're not a dog, and that's our truth. The fact of the matter lies somewhere between those two. Because the fact is that his perception is fed by specific realities that he's experienced.
Yes.
And our perception and our connection with reality is fed by our experience. And if we combine the two and we come up with an understanding of why he perceives himself as such, or why he chooses to be aligned with that creature, then we'll be in a better position to understand where he's coming from and guiding him towards a place that is more authentic, because you touched on authenticity, right? And this is the thing, which is actually a very good example, because if you look at someone and you can see they're a person and they're a human being, and they insist that they're not a human being, they're a dog, they lack authenticity. Because you don't experience them as being true to the reality you're experiencing, right?
Yes.
For the same reason you walk into a room and you feel someone is fake. You feel it in your gut,
Yeah.
right? First time you meet someone, you can sense it. And the reason you can sense it is because there's an alignment between how you connect with your authenticity and how they do. And that is why like attracts. Opposites don't attract.
Yes.
Like attracts.
Likes are traits.
We like to polarize towards people that make us feel like we are right,
Yes.
because it validates us. And that right there is the problem.
We are still seeking validation.
We're seeking validation.
Yes.
So when you want to go and find yourself, don't go looking for validation to find yourself, because you're asking someone else to tell you what you're about.
And they will tell you.
And they will. Everyone wants to tell you
Yes.
what you're about. Because the more they write about something, the more competent they feel and the more validated they are about who they are. So when you want to go and find yourself, don't go asking people about it.
Yes.
You need to turn internally. You need to understand why you are the way you are, where the influences have been in your life, why you make the assumptions you make, why you have the fears that you have.
Yes.
Are your fears rational? Are they irrational? All of those things. And that's what the book guides you through. It guides you through a very non-threatening but very... It's a fresh take on getting you to turn your focus internally rather than externally.
Yes, yes.
But not to the point where it becomes philosophical or associated with specific spirituality or religion. It is completely neutral within the context of how we experience life as human beings. And within that context, if you consider something like one of the things I write on the back cover, which is a consistent truth that I've experienced, is that happiness is not a choice, right? Everyone says be happy.
And everyone says it's a choice.
And everyone says it's a choice, right? So here's
Yes.
the thing, and this is exactly what I mean about being able to connect with the reality. Because if happiness was a choice, we would have no sad people in this world.
Definitely.
Because no one wants to consciously choose to be
To be
unhappy
sad.
or sad or depressed or whatever it is, right? Happiness is the outcome of the choices you make and achieving what you had intended to achieve. Now, if you make choices with good intentions, but you don't have enough knowledge about the consequences of the choices you're making, it's not going to take you to a happy place. Because you're going to feel like a failure when you see that the choice you made turned out to be a bad choice. And regardless of how divine your intention was, intention only counts in the starting block. It doesn't count at the finishing line. You started the races, you want to finish first. If you didn't prepare yourself sufficiently, you're not going to finish first. And regardless of how strong your intention was, it doesn't make a difference. You didn't finish first. All right? And the same thing is about choices. When you make a choice about something, accept that you only have limited knowledge about the consequences that may transpire as a result of that choice. And part of the limitation is, no matter how well you know someone, you cannot accurately predict how they're going to respond in every single circumstance. So how people respond to the choices you make, out of your control. The problem is, when you're looking for validation, you'll keep adjusting your choices to get more agreement, which is you're actually changing your life to fit in with someone else's expectation, and that's how you lose yourself. Because you allow yourself to be defined by other people's expectations. Now, here's a really contentious part, and this is something that a lot of people get wrong, especially in relationships. When they get to a point in a relationship and they decide, okay, this relationship is not for me, it's not allowing me to grow, etc., 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 they decide then, I need to leave the relationship so that I can grow.
I need to venture somewhere else.
Yes. So then there's a whole host of assumptions they're making in that, right? one of the most important ones is saying that the reason they're not growing is because of someone else. It's not because of their lack of courage to be true to themselves, but it's because someone else is not allowing them to grow. The difficulty that people don't usually consider is that they haven't allowed that person to experience the other person that they think they are capable of being. So they'll never know whether the person they want to be is in fact the kind of person the other person would actually get along better with. And the secret to that is that if you're going to go on a path of growth, I always tell people you need to make sure that the people that are important to you around you, take them on their journey with you. Don't grow on your own and then say, no, I've outgrown that group.
Yes.
Or I've outgrown my family. They're just on a different path or a different journey. If you don't take them on the journey with you, there's less chance of them appreciating the growth you're going to. And there's also less chance of you being able to influence them from a position of authenticity or credibility of why it is that they should consider also growing in the same way that you're trying to grow.
Where were you yesterday? We were having this conversation. I recall having this conversation, and I recall telling my colleagues, because there was 3 of us in studio. So it was our news reader, Letonola, and my colleague, Patricia. And I've mentioned to them, I was saying to them, I didn't say it in your words, and you saying it so well. And we mentioned that we wish we had a panel. I was saying to them that it's very sad that the reasons people are leaving out of relationships are petty.
Yes.
Who said it might not work out? You know, and another thing that is why I always say to my friends, even my colleagues, that guys, I feel we are the most unhappy generation.
Yes.
We're a very educated generation, but the least happiest. Mainly because we hear people say, no, I've been there for 10 years. Nah? And we cannot even be anywhere for 10 years. How do we think people got to 10 years? Do you think it was all jubilation throughout 10 years? No. They had to sometimes blossom. They had to sometimes become that plant between a paving where it just comes out with resilience and you're like, but I paved there. What is this? Because every single 3rd week I'm taking out plants and I'm like, but you are disrespectful. I paved here, you know. So that's what we were saying. I'm like, I'm listening to you right now. I'm thinking, where was he yesterday? Because they were here, you know.
And that's actually a critical point that you're raising, because if we take that same example of the plant, creeping out through the pavement.
Yes.
When something like that happens in our life, we feel attacked. We feel undermined, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, I put in all this effort to establish this, and you're undermining it. But we don't stop, in this case, to look at the beauty of the plant. And that, Indeed. For me, is a problem. Because we are so fixated on wanting to see outcomes the way we wanted it to be, that we don't appreciate the outcome that might even be better than what we expected.
Yes.
So we are so distracted, we wish away the happiness that we're actually chasing.
Yo, that's powerful. I've just processed it in a second. I'm thinking, what? Wishing away the happiness that we're actually chasing for. That's my caption for a certain picture.
Okay, please take me on that.
I will definitely take you. So before we let you go, let's now find out how can people get hold of the book. I know some of us young people, we love soft copies, and I was thinking about it even in the morning. I'm like, you know, my mother keeps giving me hard copies. And then after 2 months, she's asking me, where is it? And I'm like, it was not on, so should I put it on my drive? So the only hard copies I have is in books, but then literally my textbooks are soft copies.
Okay.
And then I have a bookshelf. I've realized the space is no more, but I'll buy another one. Then that's the hard copies I have. But with documents, are soft copies. But I know there's someone out there who's probably tuning in, who they are also dying for soft copies. They rather read this in a how train. Yes. They rather read this when they are trying to pretend they're in a meeting.
I'm 100% on board with you on that, because I also don't like paper.
Yes.
Funny enough, I'm a writer, but I don't like
You
paper.
Don't like
So soft copies are available on Kindle.
Amazon.
Yeah, on Amazon Kindle. And it's also available on on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're an unlimited subscriber on Kindle, you'll be able to read the book for free as part of your subscription. And in this particular instance, even though the hard copies are available, and we're starting to make it available in some of the bookstores in Johannesburg, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. On the soft copy side, personally, I think it would be even more beneficial to have it as a soft copy, because the kind of information that's in this book, the kind of things that it touches on, and the kind of things that it prompts you to consider is not something that you would do once and forget and move on, because it's, okay, I've heard that before, so it's done. It's a kind of thing that whenever you find yourself in a bit of a difficult situation, or you find yourself perplexed about something, or confused, or just not sure what you should be doing next, it's almost a companion for reference that you can always go back to and think, okay, well, let me see what is it about the assumptions that I'm getting wrong. And that's usually where we make the biggest mistakes, is assumptions, right? So just very quickly, in a nutshell, the cycle that the book prompts you about is built on from the first book, which is called the ego system. And the ego system is literally saying that we start out with a need, and we then go out in our quest to fulfill that need. But before we set out to fulfill that need, we make assumptions, and we have some knowledge about our ability to fulfill that need or to achieve it.
Yes.
Right? The moment our confidence levels about those assumptions we make is low, or we see there's too many threats to our ability to fulfill that need, fear sets in. When the fear sets in, that drives our behavior, because then you decide whether you're going to be aggressive in trying to achieve it. Are you going to be overwhelmed? Are you going to be depressed because you feel there's no hope in achieving it? And that's what depression is about. It's about absence of hope, right? And when you experience it that way, then you act and you behave in a certain way. Now, some people think that if you sit back and you do nothing about it, that's not taking action. That is taking action. Your choice is not to act, which means that you're waiting for something to happen to you. Right? So when you act and you behave, that's the first time that someone sees what you're trying to do. And then they respond to your behavior. When they respond, you see how they experience it. That results in you perceiving that whole way that played out in a certain way, and that's your perceptions. And your perceptions will then tell you, was my need fulfilled? Yes. Cool, I'm happy. If my need was not fulfilled, it might spawn new needs. To say that, okay, I couldn't get that, but now I also realize I need to get this, and that.
Yes.
And then you go back into the need cycle, and then it goes, and this cycle plays through consistently in us. Whether we choose to do it or not is irrelevant. It plays through. That is how our emotional cycle plays out. So with that being true, that theme carries out in every circumstance in our life. The good ones, the bad ones, the not so good ones, the not so bad ones. And understanding how to reconnect with that cycle, that's when you need to just get reminders or prompts from the book to say, well, okay, maybe you taking the perceptions wrong, or maybe you forgot about the fact that your needs and your fears are irrational. So how do you test that for veracity? How do you reconnect? And the more you get to know yourself in this way, that's how you find yourself. Because you need to find yourself so that you are able to hold onto your truth in the middle of a crazy crowd. And that's what we need to try and achieve. The reason why we have so much unhappiness in the world today, especially in the younger generation, is because they are so fixated on finding acceptance for what they think is important.
Precisely. All right. You said your books are also going to stores in Johannesburg. Yes. Where?
So it's already available in 3 stores. It's available at Scoob's Theatre of Books in Monte Cassino. And we're also planning with them to do a book launch there. Hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll post more information about it on social media. It's available at Book Circle Capital, I think it is. I suck at remembering names. But it's the one at 27 Boxes in Melville. There's a bookstore there. It's available there. And it's also available at Love Books in Melville as well. And I'm working with the distributors so we can try and get it into all the other mainstream bookstores around the country as well.
All right, making perfect sense. All right, Mr. Zaid, we are going to let you go. You've mentioned something I haven't forgotten, and I took a note of it. You said why you don't look at the mirror, and You don't do the mirror, 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 mirror.
Oh, yes, the mantras, the mantras.
Yes.
So this is an important one because a lot of people love mantras these days, right?
Yes.
So here's the thing. There's no shortage of people that stand in front of the mirror every day and say something like, I am enough. Right? Because you need to believe you're enough so that you don't feel like you're inadequate. Like
Yes.
you're not enough to make someone happy. So here's the problem with that. When you're standing in front of the mirror and telling yourself, I am enough, because you need to believe you're enough, it means you've already convinced yourself that you're not enough. You've convinced yourself that you're not enough, which is why you're now trying to convince yourself that you are enough.
Yeah.
The problem with that is, who convinced you that you're not enough? Whose reality did you adopt for yourself and then convince yourself that you need to change the messages you're sending to the universe? Because that's another thing that we like to do. We like to say we need to send positive vibes to the universe and it will answer. That always reminds me of one very famous, or my favorite quote, one of my favorite quotes. It says that if you expect life to treat you well because you're a good person, that's like expecting a bull not to charge at you because you're a vegetarian.
Interesting. Something people should take a note of. So, you guys can find him on different social media platforms so that you can follow up on the book. But his website is zaidismail.com, and that is where, from that website, I've visited the website. It's a user-friendly website. He even has his auto reply howling at you there. So it's almost like you talking to him, but it's him. Eh? So, so you just visit there, and it will navigate you to the social media platforms where you are able to access him at. Thank you so much, Mr. Zaid, for joining me
Thank
this
you for having
afternoon.
me.